Food is food should not be part of resistance for any people in the world. What we eat and how we eat and the seasonality and the link to the land means so much. But Palestinian cuisine is like, I think, any other cuisine. It's part of our identity. It's part of who we are. Um, how we cook depends on where we come from in Palestine. It tells the story of a region of Palestine. What we use, and I always use this example of how we use dairy. In the south of Palestine, we use leban jamid, which is dried, preserved yogurt. The more north you go, where the landscape is greener, people use fresh yogurt. It may sound like a little detail, but it's a detail that tells the story of hundreds of years of preservation techniques. It's a detail that tells hundreds of years of farming, of foraging, how we use fresh za'atar. I use fresh za'atar in Bethlehem, the heaps, because that's foraged all over Palestine. If you go to Gaza, there's much less fresh za'atar, but there's more seafood, etc. So it's the story of each region. And I think that's the beauty of it. Food should not be part of resistance for any people in the world. But the reality of living under occupation, of seeing our landscape, our resources, our terroir, our people being erased, means that any food storyteller, any food reality becomes part of this preservation and wanting to exist. I'm a cook. I cook things that are living, herbs, foraged, fruit, vegetable, meat, things that have, that are full of positive light. I don't want to be somebody writing about preservation of something that may disappear. I don't want to be somebody telling a story of vineyards that may disappear. I don't want to be telling the story of farmers that may have to change the way they work. The reality in Palestine is all of that, sadly, is true. The sheer reality that we've been living under occupation for 77 years means that systematically there's been, on one hand, theft of our resources. I come from a family that's based in Bethlehem. We were never part of the farming traditions of Palestine, but also we owned orange groves in Jaffa, and those were confiscated in 48. Do I really want to be telling the story of a disappeared orange that I never got the chance to taste? Or should I have the right to be actually telling the story of oranges that are thriving? Because that is what I should be saying. That's where, for me, the whole idea of preservation and cultural resistance are things that are imposed on us today by the reality of the horror we're living through, but they shouldn't be the raison d'etre of Palestinian food. What we also have to acknowledge is there has been systematic appropriation of Palestinian food. And that, for me, fills the rest of the story, which is not only are Palestinians being starved in Gaza right now, not only are Palestinians seeing their landscape taken over by confiscation, by settlement, by, the burning down of olive groves and grapes, but also the occupiers are taking our cuisine, celebrating it. In London, Paris, New York, etc., you have a bunch of Israeli chefs cooking Palestinian food and not acknowledging that it's Palestinian. I keep saying this. I have no problem for anybody cooking my food, my cultural food, but acknowledge what it is. Because I think that's the right to the homage of the people who created that food, of the people who are the ones who worked that land. Now, frika is a good example. Frika is this fantastic green wheat that's picked early. It's charred, then the pellicle is rubbed off, and we treat it as a rice, and it has this like deep smoky flavor. I see recipes popping up all over the world with frika on them. Very few actually acknowledge that frika is Palestinian. And that's the problem. That's the problem of appropriation. So the erasure is at different levels. I think we're all people who work in a craft. Whether you cook, whether you bake, whether you produce a food element, it's a craft. And a craft is about the knowledge, the transmission of knowledge. You know, what what's beautiful in food is there is that perpetuity of transmission. Today we call it training, but it's actually an apprenticeship. We and I love those very modern concepts of things like mentorship. I don't know what mentorship is. I know that in a kitchen you train people on day in, day out. It's not an established little sheet of, so we're going to do this training today, we're going to do that training. It's training every minute. When you taste a dish being prepared and you chat with your colleague about, oh, but maybe we should rectify the seasoning, or maybe we should rectify this or that. Or you tell them the story of, you know, here in Akub, we have a team that's very diverse of origins. Some are familiar with Palestinian food, some are not. Some have learned Palestinian food with us here. And it's an ongoing story. And that's where craft is. Craft is not with the precision and excellence of what a craft person does. It's also about their interaction with the people around them. And I think in food, it is so much this. How did I learn how to cook? I learned to cook in my grandmother's kitchen and then my mother's kitchen. But then I formally learned to cook in France. What do I remember of my hospitality school day? Not so much what I read in a book. I remember what the chef I worked with was showing me in the kitchen. I remember the times I made mistakes where, I burned a steak, or I've never burned a steak, but yeah, whatever. And it's those mistakes that make you learn and grow. And I think that's really the beauty of our craft. Palestinian cuisine has been for a long time underrepresented for plenty of reasons, but we've seen the usage of words like Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Levantine, which for me, those three words mean nothing. They're not honest in their representation. Palestinian food is a word we've been hearing much more recently, and happily so, where you have fantastic chefs a bit all over the world that are cooking Palestinian, that are writing Palestinian books, and they're telling the story of Palestine. How do I see it globally in the future? I think there's no rest allowed until you overhear somebody's conversation at a crossroad with their friend, where they're thinking, where are we going to go eat tonight? And one of the options they would be evoking would be Palestinian food. We are like any other cuisine in the world. We are like Italian cuisine, like French cuisine, like Pakistani cuisine, and like Moroccan cuisine, and so forth. And the list is very long. Every country in the world has a cuisine. Within countries, every region has a cuisine. What I find fascinating is how that concept of Asian food has been debunked over the last few years because it means nothing. What is Asian food? Asia is such a big continent with such differences. And today you see Chinese restaurants that are specifically cooking a region of China. You see Indian and Pakistani restaurants cooking specific areas from the roots of where their food culture comes. And it's the same about with Cambodian cuisine and Vietnamese cuisine and so forth. That is what I would love to see about with Palestinian food. Hummus is not the only thing we have. Hummus is great. I love hummus, but hummus is not the only thing we have. I once said years ago that there would be no hummus in my restaurants. That's not true because there is hummus in my restaurants, but only on brunch. because there's also how we eat that is important. There is foods that are linked to occasions, to moments, to instants that are important. And I think that's where I would love people, you know, to make a parallel with Italian food. Years ago, people thought you could go to an Italian restaurant and have pasta as a core, as your main course. In Italy, nobody ever had pasta as a main course. Pasta is a course out before your main course. And you see in the world, things have changed, so people are aware. People used to go to an Italian restaurant and order a cappuccino at 3 in the afternoon, which I think I agree with Italians. It is heresy. Look, with Palestinian chefs, like a lot of chefs that come from countries that for years were told your food is not good enough. There's a whole generation that was very much aspiring to do international food and do it well. But we ended up with, crazy things like fettuccine alfredo, which doesn't exist in Italy, on menus in Palestine. We ended up with people trying to do cordon bleus. Why? Why? Like, I don't get it. Anyway, but I do think we're seeing with the younger generation is people are closer to the terroirs. They understand what are our produce. They understand the value of the food that was home food today being presented in a restaurant setting. But you can tweak it, you can play around with it, you can make it into fine dining, you can make it into, but be faithful to those flavors. And I think the younger generation is very aware of that. And I hope we're going to see Palestinian restaurants popping up all over the world. Every morning I would go up to the market and whatever produce was there from those different artisans and farmers would be the menu we had that day. Then I'd go to the butchers and buy the meat based on what I had bought in terms of vegetables and forage, greens, etc. And then go to the baker and order the bread for that day, and then go to the spice shop and get the spices I needed for that day. And then that's how I would elaborate my menu. Olive oil is a big thing in Palestine. We use olive oil in everything. I work with a group of different artisans all over the country that do olive oil. Who do I recommend? It all depends where you are. The only thing I can say is get a good olive oil. Get a good Palestinian olive oil, not because it's Palestinian, because it's very good olive oil. There's plenty of people I've worked with and I work with. I work with Zaytun, I work with Olive Odyssey, I work with Al Ard, depending on the different countries they distribute in. But what really counts is, I've come across very small productions that have somebody importing their olives or olive oil for like one season, and it's fantastic olive oil. Why I work with people like Zaytun here in Akub is because I know the farmers. I was lucky to meet the farmers that are growing the olives that are then used in Palestine to make the oil that Zaytun have. Zaytun have the social justice engagement. I work with Olive Odyssey because I know, like, in the case of a few of the farmers, I actually know the trees personally. It matters. It matters. I work with Dead Sea salt that comes from the last Palestinian artisan making, um, extracting Dead Sea salt, Halak family, and that's something that's not. It's available in certain countries, not available in the UK yet. They have bath salt in the UK from him, but and then there's the whole grape artisans. We work with most Palestinian wineries. We work with Jaskala, with Ashkat, with Taiba, with Kenzan. We are in talks with Domaine Cassis. We're in talks with Julia. We work with a distillery called Muaddi Distillery. What people have to remember, the first grapes planted by humanity were planted by the Natufians in Palestine and Jericho. During the Roman period, the most famous wine in the world was something called Vinum Gazentum. It came from Gaza. And the form of the jars used to transport that wine were called the Gaza jars. So there is also this whole reclaiming of our culture, which is important. I keep telling people work with artisans. Work with artisans who you know are real, who you know are doing that work. Don't go to fancy packaged stuff because it's fancy packaged. What counts is what's inside that bottle, what counts is what's inside that jar. Buy sumac that's real sumac. The trick with sumac is you get sumac into your hand, you rub it. If it leaves a red color, it means food coloring's been used. Don't buy that sumac. It can say whatever you want on it on the box. Don't buy it. When you buy maftool, and maftool is not couscous, by the way. People mix it up. No, it is maftool. It's hand draws. It matters. It matters where it comes from. Every artisan, you're seeing the surface. It's an artisan you're seeing. But in reality, an artisan, there's plenty of people behind. If we're talking about a farm, it means there's people working on that farm. It means there is people packaging this product. It means, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Palestinian families that manage to sustain themselves thanks to a jar of za'atar you're buying, or a bottle of olive oil, or a bottle of wine you're buying from Palestine. It's important to buy produce from Palestine because I think that when it comes to dry produce, again, I don't think you should buy fresh ingredients from anywhere except where you are. It has to be locally sourced. But if we're talking about olive oil, wine, maftool, frika, za'atar, sumac, laban jamid, of course you have to buy from Palestine because there are fantastic artisans. There are people that do exceptional produce, but also because we all have to have a moral engagement to where we source our products from. It matters. Where, if you're an artisan anywhere in the world, you deserve to be supported by people who will discern and recognize and value the knowledge you have, the quality of your production, the quality of the land you're keeping if your product is based on the land, why you're not using chemicals, why, all of that. I always find it strange that things have to be labeled today as, labeled with the positive things like organic, things like low intervention, things like natural. I think that should be the default status. And we should label the things that are not okay for us. And that's where I think artisans from Palestine are doing beautiful work. When you get my book, Bethlehem, you'll see there's stories, and there's stories of artisans. Some of them that do produce things you can purchase abroad, and some of them who don't. Some of them who are the people I work with in Bethlehem on a daily basis. What are we use, chefs? We take produce and we make this. We make mansaf. Mansaf is laban jamil, which is this dried yogurt. It is rice, lamb meat, bread, garlic. We create this, but we can't create this if there's no artisans giving us. Here, the milk is British milk, giving us fantastic milk. We can't create mujaddara, which is our rice and lentil basic dish of Palestine, which it's one of my favorite things in the world. If we didn't have artisans doing fantastic sumac that goes onto the onions, we can't make our batik salad that we do in our kub. It has compressed watermelon, it has fresh watermelon, it has olives, if marjoram, mint. If then the olive oil on this makes a difference. If we didn't have an artisan that made a difference with olive oil, this wouldn't taste the same. And I think that's where, artisans are people we need to recognize. I got the first copies of the book. I went around Palestine and gave a copy to the people in the book. Some of them were easy, more or less, because there's my mother and father in the book. because they influence me every day. But then when I went to the shores of the Dead Sea and I gave this book to Mr. Halak, who's been there for the better of 60 years, I felt I was doing something wrong because having, a couple of pages about him here, he was so touched. And I felt that wasn't right. I should be touched to have had the privilege to write about him and to be able to use the salt he produces. It's not the other way around. We don't do favors as chefs to artisans. They're the ones doing a favor to us. They're the ones blessing us with that produce they've made. And I think that's important. There's one person in the book I couldn't give the book to, which is Abu Muhammad, with who I cooked on Musakhan in the north of Palestine, in Sabastia, because of the situation in Palestine. I couldn't drive up to Sabastia. There was too many settler attacks on the roads, but they're the ones you should celebrate. We just take their produce, their stories, and we have to be grateful for it.